Tonight on Skyline, the world looks like it is standing on the edge of something dangerous. Missiles, bombers, secret maps, empty missile stockpile, NATO panic, and Cuba warning. There is somewhere in the middle of all of this, America that is trying to prove it is still fully in control. But here's the question that nobody is asking very loudly. Well, what if the world is slowly discovering that even America has limits? I am Driti, and tonight we break down 9 explosive stories shaking Washington, Tehran, Europe, and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine waking up and seeing headlines across major news channels saying that American bombers are moving closer to Iran again. Not routine aircraft, not surveillance plane, actual long-range B-1B bombers. Aircraft specifically associated with massive strike capability. Well, the kind of bombers America uses when it wants both enemies and allies to understand the whole situation has become extremely serious. And suddenly the whole West Asia, it began holding its breath. Reports claim that the United States repositioned strategic bombers while tensions with Iran exploded over Tehran's nuclear program here. And not just nuclear program, by the way, missile activity, growing military aggression in that particular region. In the meantime, their president, Mr. Donald Trump, he added even more uncertainty by refusing to clearly deny the military action here. And let's be honest, in geopolitics, silence can sometimes be more frightening than a threat. Because when Washington quietly moves the military assets, while leaders avoid direct answers, countries begin preparing for possibility of war behind the closed doors. In the meantime, Iran immediately responded with aggressive warning. Their powerful Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed that any strike on Iranian nuclear facility, it could trigger retaliation against American military bases, and that too across the Middle East. Bases in Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, Syria, and even naval forces in the Gulf. All of a sudden, it became a possible target. Well, military analysts, they also began discussing how Iran could activate the proxy group network, and that too across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen again, turning a single strike into a wider regional conflict almost overnight. In the meantime, oil markets became nervous because the world too understands one simple reality here. If the Gulf region becomes unstable, fuel prices globally can explode within hours. India, Europe, Asian economies, and even American consumers could all feel the impact through inflation and rise of energy cost. But perhaps the most dangerous part is that this is not Iraq in 2003. Iran today has advanced drones, underground missile cities, cyber warfare capabilities, naval attack system, and allies willing to challenge America indirectly. In fact, some experts believe Iran has spent years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. China and Russia are also watching very carefully because any weakness shown by America, it could reshape the global balance of power. And tonight, millions are asking the same terrifying question. Is America using pressure diplomacy just to force Iran into submission, or are we witnessing the opening chapter of a much larger war that could destabilize entire world economy? The war, it is not just in Iran right now. Tensions, they have divided to Cuba as well. Well, United States, Marco Rubio's warning to Cuba, it has suddenly reviewed memory many people believed belonged to history books. United States Secretary of State, he declared that Washington remains highly alert regarding any national security threat linked to Cuba. And the tone of the statement, it immediately shocked the observers across Latin America. This did not sound like a routine diplomacy. It sounded like strategic warning language, and instantly Cold War comparison returned. Now here, older generations do remember how Cuba once pushed the world terrifyingly close to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now that particular fear, it never fully disappeared inside American politics. Analysts believe that Washington may now be increasingly concerned about deeper cooperation between Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. And that too at a time when America is already struggling to manage crisis globally. In the meantime, Ukraine continues draining Western resources. Iranian tensions are escalating, China-Taiwan rivalry keeps intensifying, and now Cuba is suddenly returning to America's security calculation. Here, some experts believe that the United States intelligence agencies worry about the surveillance infrastructure, intelligence sharing, cyber operations, or foreign military influence expanding near the American territory. But others believe that the timing is political, designed to project strength before the election. And in the meantime, Havana reacted very angrily, by the way, accusing America of intermediation and political aggression. That's right. Cuban officials claim that Washington is deliberately creating fear in the region just to justify pressure campaign. But let's be honest, the ordinary Cuban population is now stuck in the middle of this geopolitical catfight. The country is already facing severe economic hardship, inflation, electricity blackout, food shortage, fuel scarcity, and mass migration here. Thousands of Cubans continue leaving the island, searching for stability abroad. Many fear that the tensions are going to be worse with America, and America could trigger harsher sanctions and deeper suffering for them. Latin American governments, they are watching very nervously because they worry that the whole region could once again become trapped between global superpowers. But critics are asking an uncomfortable question tonight. Can America realistically sustain confrontation with Iran, Russia, China, and Cuba all at the same time without stretching itself dangerously thin? Because behind all the aggressive rhetoric, there is growing concern that Washington's global strategy may be under more pressure than it publicly admits. Now, speaking of America's military strength, for years American drones symbolized absolute military dominance, right? The MQ-9 Reaper became one of the most feared weapons in modern warfare. Silent, precise, deadly, and capable of targeting enemies from a long distance. Countries feared hearing that sound in the sky because it often meant destruction was moments away. But now Iran claims that it is successfully turning America's prized drone fleet into burning wreckage. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, reports suggest that between 24 to 30 MQ-9 Reaper, they were destroyed since tension escalated with Iran. This is even partially true, then this becomes one of the biggest embarrassments in modern American history. Why? Because financial loss alone, it could approach $1 billion, but the symbolic damage, it may be even greater. America spent decades building an image of an overwhelming technological superiority. The idea was simple. American systems were supposed to dominate weaker enemies through unmatched precision and advanced capabilities. But Iran appears to be adapting rapidly. Military experts, they believe that Tehran may be using layered air defenses, radar tracking, electronic warfare, cyber interference, and missile ambush just to challenge these drones. Suddenly, weapons once viewed as nearly untouchable are looking vulnerable. And the entire world is kind of studying this very carefully. China is studying, Russia is studying, North Korea is also studying. Even successful Iranian interception, it sends a message that American military technology may not be invisible as many once believed. Some analysts say that this war is exposing a larger transformation in warfare itself. Future conflicts may no longer depend only on expensive super weapons, but now it is dependent on mass production, affordability, and sustainability. Wait, can you imagine destroying a drone worth tens of millions of dollars using a much cheaper missile? Economically, that becomes devastating over time. In the meantime, Pentagon officials are unlikely to publicly admit the full scale of losses though, because military perception, it matters a lot in geopolitics. America's power depends not only on weapons but also on the belief that those weapons guarantee superiority. Once that image it starts cracking publicly, rivals become more confident. And perhaps the most dangerous question again tonight is, if America's advanced drone system are struggling against Iran now, what happens during an even larger conflict involving Russia and China in near future? Well, let's shift our focus from the superpowers and let's talk about one United States enemy that is living in shadows today. The one enemy that is hiding behind but still is very, very dangerous. Well, the story is explosive because it attacks America's image in West Asia at a very emotional and ideological level. The Iran-backed Houthis have accused the United States of economically plundering Iraq and benefiting from Iranian oil wealth, while ordinary Iraqis, they continue living through poverty, instability, corruption, unemployment, and political chaos. That accusation, it has reopened very painful wounds across the region. Many Iraqis still feel that their country became the battlefield for foreign powers after the Iraq War. Entire generations grew up with what? Surrounded by bombs, militia, occupation, violence, economic collapse, and constant instability. And now, anti-America group, they are using those memories strategically once again. Their leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, he called for boycott of Western and Israeli products, urging all the Muslim countries should stop financially supporting nations that believe are harming the Islamic world here. This is not only political messaging anymore. It is ideological warfare mixed with economic pressure. Social media campaigns, speeches, propaganda videos, online influencers, and emotional narrative, they all are becoming major weapons in modern conflict. Groups aligned against America, they are trying to convince ordinary people that Washington profits from West Asian instability instead of solving it. Well, no judgment here, but whether it is fully accurate or exaggerated, whatever it is. But these narratives spread quickly among population already frustrated over Gaza, sanctioned, inflation, unemployment, rising tension involving Iran. And wait, timing matters here, and that too a lot. These accusations are emerging exactly when anti-American anger is already growing because of fears surrounding a larger regional war. And that creates a second battlefield for Washington. The battle for public opinion, because modern wars are no longer fought only with bombs and missiles. They are fought through narrative, perception, social media influence, and emotional storytelling. And the bigger damage for America, it may not only be military resistance, but losing credibility among millions of young people across West Asia who increasingly see Washington through a lens of distrust and anger. And while America is fighting from multiple ends, Donald Trump has announced 5,000 additional American troops for Poland this time. And it has kind of shocked entire Europe and created fresh uncertainty inside NATO. Well, European leaders, they are struggling to understand the larger strategy behind these sudden military decisions. First, there were discussions about reducing troop commitment in parts of Europe, right, if you remember? Then concern emerging about weakening American support for NATO, and then suddenly Poland is receiving thousands of additional US troops. Here, many analysts believe that Mr. Trump is reconstructing America's European military posture, and that too around governments that he personally sees as more politically aligned with him. Poland has strongly supported tougher position against Russia and has massively increased military spending in recent years. In fact, the country has purchased tanks, missile systems, fighter jets, artilleries, and air defense system because fears of Russian aggression that remains extremely high after the Ukraine war. But Moscow is watching these troop deployment very, very carefully. Well, Russia already claims that NATO expansion threatens its security, and every new American deployment, it becomes useful propaganda for the Kremlin. In the meantime, countries like Germany and France, they are increasingly uncomfortable with unpredictability coming from Washington. Well, ladies and gentlemen, European allies, they want long-term strategic stability, not any sudden policy change tied to domestic American politics. Here, some European leaders, they are now openly discussing whether Europe must eventually become less dependent on the United States for security protection or not. That conversation, it would have sounded literally impossible a few years ago. But today it is becoming more mainstream. And yes, at the very same time, NATO itself appears increasingly divided internally over spending, strategy, and military priorities. Some governments fear that Europe could become trapped in broader confrontation involving Russia, Iran, China, and that too without fully controlling its own security decisions. And beneath everything lies a deeper fear. Is America quietly preparing Europe for a future where multiple global conflicts erupt simultaneously? Or is this mainly political signaling ahead of elections? Well, either way, Europe tonight looks nervous. It looks uncertain, increasingly aware that the global security order may be entering a dangerous new phase. Our next story, well, this particular story, it feels like a direct return to the Cold War politics. After Mr. Marco Rubio, he labeled Cuba a growing security concern, Havana reacted aggressively, accusing Washington of spreading fear and provoking tension. But what truly alarmed analysts was the growing discussion about Russia and China potentially increasing support for Cuba. Well, if tensions continue escalating, and that's a dangerous, dangerous level, ladies and gentlemen. Today's geopolitical environment, it is completely different from the post-Cold War era when America dominated globally, and that too with very little opposition. Russia and China are now increasingly coordinating their efforts against the US influence worldwide. And let's be honest, Cuba's geographic position remains extremely sensitive because it sits only a short distance from the American territory, right? China has already expanded trade, infrastructure project, investment, diplomatic influence across Latin America, while Russia continues strengthening its ties with governments hostile to Washington. That deadly combination. It deeply worries the US strategists here. Some intelligence experts, they believe that America fears surveillance infrastructure or any military cooperation expanding very quietly near its borders. Nobody is openly talking about missiles or nuclear deployment yet, but the rhetoric itself, that is becoming more aggressive. And ladies and gentlemen, in geopolitics, perception often it shapes policy decision. If Washington believes hostile powers are building influence and that too near American territory, history shows America reacts forcefully. In the meantime, the Cuban people, they feel trapped in the middle of geopolitical struggle that is much larger than themselves. Blackout, inflation, shortages, migration, economic exhaustion, they all are already pushing many citizens towards depression. Young Cubans specifically fear that their country could become isolated again if tension worsens. But perhaps the biggest takeaway tonight is that the world's major fault lines are beginning to connect together. Iran tension, Russia tension, China tension, Cuba tension, different regions increasingly tied into one larger confrontation between global powers. And that interconnected pressure, it may define the next decade of the world politics. Now, let's go back to Iran because this is very, very important. This may be one of the most important stories tonight, perhaps, because it exposes something America rarely discusses openly. Military limits. Well, reports suggest that the United States fired more than 200 THAAD interceptor and over 100 SM series missiles while helping defend Israel from Iranian attacks. These are not any ordinary weapons. Let me tell you the significance here. They are among the most advanced missile defense system ever built, costing millions of dollars each. And according to reports, America burned through a major portion of its interceptor inventory within a remarkable short period. That is deeply alarming Pentagon planners here because missile production that is slow, expensive, technologically complex. These systems require advanced electronics, specialized factories, rare components, and long manufacturing timeline. In fact, some missiles can take months or maybe years to replace fully. Well, now we know that modern wars consume the weapons faster than the defense industries can build them. And suddenly, America faces a deeply uncomfortable question tonight. What happens if another major crisis erupts simultaneously? What if China-Taiwan tension explodes tomorrow? What if North Korea escalates? What if Iran launches another wave of attack? Here, military readiness, it is not infinite. It cannot be, even for a superpower. Well, for decades, America projected the image of endless military capability, but modern warfare is now exposing financial, industrial, and logistical reality. That is kind of impossible to hide forever. Some analysts now warn that America's defense industry, it was designed mainly for shorter regional conflict, not multiple simultaneous high-intensity confrontation involving advanced adversaries. Well, this changes the global conversation about power itself. Because let's be honest here, once rivals believe that American resources could be stretched thin, they may become more willing to challenge Washington, and that too strategically. And perhaps the scariest part is that this conflict has shown how quickly even the most advanced military stockpile can disappear under sustained pressure. And in the meantime, Iran is now gaining confidence. And now, Iran has done something controversial. That's right, Iran has released a very controversial new map connected to the Strait of Hormuz, and that has sent shockwaves through Gulf capitals and global energy market. Well, Tehran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, they claim that extended authority over important maritime zone near one of the world's most critical oil choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Wait, let's take a pause here. Understand why this matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz, it is not simply water separating countries. It is one of the most strategically important economic artery on planet Earth. A massive percentage of global oil shipment passes through this narrow route, and that too every single day. If tensions there escalate even slightly, oil prices can surge worldwide almost immediately. India feels it, Europe feels it, America feels it too. The entire global economy, it feels it. Iran's message appears deliberate though. We control this region more than you think. Well, Gulf nations are deeply uncomfortable because freedom of navigation is central to the global trade and energy security. In fact, for a decade, America positioned itself as the military protector of these shipping routes. But Iran is now openly challenging that idea. Shipping companies, insurance firms, oil traders, global investors, all are already calculating risk very carefully. Some reports suggest firms are discussing alternative route, emergency contingency plan, just in case military accident increase there. Well, even rumors of instability. It can raise shipping insurance costs, transportation rise globally. And the danger, it is not just military. It is economic, it is political. Rising oil prices can trigger inflation worldwide, making transport, flight, groceries, electricity, and daily important things more expensive for ordinary people, thousands of miles away from West Asia. Some experts even warn that serious confrontation in Hormuz, it could temporarily disturb the global energy supply chain entirely. And that is why this particular story, it matters far beyond the Gulf region. One military miscalculation there, it could impact economies and families across the entire world, and that too within days. And the final story, ladies and gentlemen, it may be the most uncomfortable for Washington because it fundamentally challenges and changes how the world sees modern warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's headlines, they are not just news. They are about a changing global balance of power, and the world is definitely watching very, very carefully. I am Driti. This was Skyline, and trust me, this story is far from over.